Christmas morning in Cedar Falls is usually quiet, just snow collecting on the porch rail and the distant hum of a plow somewhere up the mountain road. I brewed a pot of cinnamon tea before sunrise, not because anyone was visiting, but because I always did. I liked the way the steam curled in the cold light. It filled the silence with something warm. When I opened the door to check the weather, I nearly tripped over it. A fruit basket, glossy and wrapped in plastic, slumped against the doorframe. A card was wedged into the handle, barely dry. 3 words in Cambria's handwriting: Peace, Cambria. No love, Mom, no call. Just a signature as impersonal as the faded ink. The apples were already soft. The pears looked like they'd been shipped a week too late. The label on the basket read, Fresh Valley Baskets, Bulk Holiday Promo. I set it on the kitchen table. The plastic crinkled like cellophane at a funeral. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself not every gesture needs a bow or a phone call. But when my phone buzzed a few minutes later, I knew it wasn't a Merry Christmas text. It was Chase Bank. You've made a purchase, $12,400, Aspen Ridge Resort, card ending in 0472. I stared at the notification. 0472. My card. The one I use for groceries prescriptions and online pharmacy refills. The card I keep in the drawer under the coffee filters and the old AA batteries. The one Cambria borrowed once for a dental bill and never gave back. Just read me the number over the phone one day and said I'll cover it next week. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't even take a second look at the basket still sitting on the table. Instead, I walked to the drawer. The card was there, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. I poured the tea into my cup, the cinnamon steeping darker than usual, and sat by the window facing the woods. The snow was falling harder now, the kind that buries old footprints, the kind that doesn't ask questions. And I knew without bitterness or surprise that this wasn't the first time I'd been left out in the cold. It wasn't the first time. That's what settled in next, heavier than the snow outside. This charge, this $12,000 declaration wasn't an exception. It was a continuation. I could trace it back in pieces. 100 here, a few hundred there. Just until Friday, Mom. I left my wallet at home. Can I put this on your account? I'll Venmo you later. The promises were always wrapped in casual tone, like asking for a glass of water. But they never came with follow-up. Only more asking. The PIN was first given when Cambria needed to pay for gas after her internship. I remember standing in the garage holding the phone, reading her the numbers slowly. I'd written them on the back of an old grocery receipt and folded it once. She never gave it back. I never asked. There was the lease I co-signed when she was 23, still finishing her art degree. She said her credit wasn't strong yet, and that I'd never even be contacted. I paid her deposit a week later when the payment got stuck in her bank. I can't remember the last time she offered to pay me back, but I remember every time I told myself not to bring it up because it would sound petty, because mothers don't put tabs on love, because bringing it up might make her call, less visit, less love, less. It crept up in other ways too. Her birthday messages came after noon. Her Christmas cards were store-bought and unsigned. The last time she hugged me without needing anything was maybe high school. Maybe. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't come with slammed doors or broken heirlooms. It came as a pattern so quiet I almost didn't notice until it had taken root. It lived in my checking account, in my silence, in my willingness to believe that helping was always the right thing. I glanced again at the notification on my phone, still glowing faintly. My name was on the account. But somewhere along the way, Cambria had started treating it like hers, and I had started letting her. I moved through the house slowly like a visitor in a place I used to own. The hallway walls still held Cambria's paintings, those half-finished abstracts she swore would be her breakthrough. I'd paid her tuition with a loan that outlived its purpose, and the only return was art that never sold and silence that never explained why. Her senior project hung by the guest room door. Acrylic on canvas. Heavy brushstrokes in mustard and gray. She once called it emotional residue. I didn't ask what she meant, and she never asked if I liked it. Still, I framed it. In the living room, the couch sagged on the side where she used to curl up with her tablet legs folded under her. She'd text me from across the room when she wanted snacks. That was when she still came home for the holidays before flights got expensive and work got chaotic. Before I stopped hoping, the kitchen clock ticked with a sound I'd tuned out years ago. Under it, a bulletin board with old notes, still pinned reminders to refill prescriptions a recipe Cambria emailed when she'd started her gluten-free phase. The handwriting was mine. The decisions were always hers. Even the guest bathroom told stories. Her lavender lotion still sat unopened on the shelf. She'd left it there last spring after a short visit where she barely spoke to me, but took 3 phone calls from work. This house was once a place I built for togetherness. I'd painted it in warm colors, filled the cupboards with things they liked, decorated each room with some version of memory. But walking through it now, it felt more like a record of things I gave without being asked. Proof of how easily presence turns into expectation. How quickly giving becomes assumed. I stood in the center of the hallway and looked around, not for anything in particular, just long enough to realize something simple and sharp. Nothing in this house was broken, but everything in it had stopped feeling like mine. In the hallway, cabinet second drawer from the bottom was where I kept the things no one ever asked about, folders with names and dates, years sorted into manila envelopes and plastic sleeves. It used to be for tax season. Then it became something else. I pulled out the one labeled Cambria, expenses, and laid it open on the kitchen table next to the fruit basket I still hadn't touched. The papers were neat. I've always been neat. Health premiums, emergency flights, counseling, co-pays, college fees, and the yoga retreat she swore would reset her burnout. Each page stamped with my name at the bottom. Some lines were small, $180 for a last-minute prescription. Others were heavier, $5,000 for tuition. She never finished $3,200 for a moving deposit she never moved out of. There were grocery deliveries and surprise vet bills. A subscription I didn't recognize, but kept paying for just in case. Altogether, over 2 years, $68,200. There was no bitterness in the ink. Just numbers, just records. But every figure held something unsaid. Not once had she asked if I could afford it. Not once had she paused to ask if I was okay. At the back of the folder, tucked between 2 statements, I found a slip of notepaper in my own handwriting. The ink was faded, and the edges curled like something forgotten too long. It said, "If no one asks if you're okay, keep the receipts. They won't ask twice." I'd written it one night after Cambria canceled dinner last minute for the 3rd time that month because something came up. I'd made stew from scratch. She never mentioned it again. I ran my hand over the pages, slowly, not out of anger, but to remind myself that these things happened, that I didn't imagine them, that I hadn't just been generous, I'd been invisible. I slipped the folder back in place and closed the drawer. Not with force, just with the knowledge that I'd carried too many things in silence. And now, finally, I was ready to set one of them down. The bank's website still looked the same, blue headers, sterile white space, a little spinning wheel that always took too long. I hadn't logged in for weeks. Most things were on autopay now, quiet systems for a quiet life. But there it was, my name at the top and underneath in smaller letters. Cambria Hammond authorized user. No alert, no warning. Just her name sitting beside mine like it belonged there. I hovered for a while, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I did. The mouse drifted from her name to the remove user option. It wasn't dramatic, just a line of text, plain and unblinking. I clicked it. A prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to remove this user?" I clicked, "Yes." Nothing happened. No music, No applause. Just a refreshed screen, and then her name was gone. I closed the laptop and called the local branch to confirm. A young man named Levi picked up. I recognized his voice. He used to bag groceries when he was in high school. "Yes, ma'am," he said after a pause. "You're all set. Access revoked on your end and ours." I thanked him and hung up. There was no weight lifted, no rush of power, just the quiet certainty of something finished, not broken, just complete. Later that afternoon, I drove into town and walked into a law office near the old courthouse. Andrea Fields greeted me with a gentle nod. We didn't need to talk much. She'd written my original will 10 years ago, the one that divided everything equally. "I'd like to change that," I said. "No division at all." She blinked once, but didn't ask why. "I want to establish a scholarship," I continued, "for women over 50, single, widowed, whatever. People who still have work in them even if no one else sees it." She nodded again. "That's a legacy." I signed the papers with a pen that said, "Fields and Mason Legal." The ink bled slightly at the edge of my signature, but it held. When I stepped out, the wind had picked up, shaking the dried pine branches overhead. I pulled my coat tighter, not because I felt cold, but because I didn't anymore. And for the first time in years, I had something no one else could spend. The phone rang once at noon, then again at 2. Cambria's name each time, no message, no text. Just the sharp burst of sound followed by a silence I was beginning to prefer. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to explain. Instead, I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out one of the cinnamon candles I'd been saving for no reason other than habit. I lit it slowly, the way Walter used to light matches, careful and patient, like the flame had to be earned. The house filled with a soft scent I hadn't noticed in years. Not sweet, just warm. I brewed a cup of ginger tea and set the old jazz CD to play in the background. The saxophone wove through the silence without trying to interrupt it. I sat in the same chair I always sat in, the cushion, slightly dipped from time. Cambria called again. I let it ring. Some silences feel like a punishment. This one didn't. This one felt like space. Like breath. Like the sound of something settling after it's been cracked open. I looked around the room and realized the quiet wasn't empty. It was finally mine. Not filled with expectation or tension or the hum of what-ifs. I sipped the tea. The ginger burned, then calmed. The candle flickered. And when the phone rang a 4th time, I turned it face down without a thought, the screen blinking its small, useless insistence against the wood. In that moment, I wasn't retreating. I was choosing. Cambria called the next morning. This time, she left a message. "We need to talk. Saturday. My place. 3 p.m. It wasn't a request. It sounded like a summons. When I arrived, her driveway was lined with clean mulch and new stone pavers, the kind of landscaping you pay for in installments. She opened the door, but didn't smile. "Come in," she said, already turning her back. The living room was staged white walls, glass coffee table, not a single photo of us anywhere. Evan and Lily were already seated. A glass of water sat in front of each of them, untouched. "We're worried," Cambria began. "This sudden financial behavior. It's not like you." I didn't respond. I reached into my bag and placed a stack of papers on the table, one by one. "Here's what I've paid over the last 2 years," I said. "Tuition co-pays, rent gaps, ski trips. Totals $73,000. Cambria raised her eyebrows, then laughed, dry and sharp. "You kept track of all that? That's a little intense?" "I was an accountant for 30 years, I said. "Numbers are how I remember things." Evan leaned forward. "So now we're just freeloaders. Is that it?" "I didn't say that. I said I'm done." Lily looked away. Her lip trembled, but she didn't speak. Cambria crossed her arms. "You're acting like a victim. That's not fair." I pulled out a smaller note folded once and placed it on top of the stack. In my handwriting, I no longer owe the world that took me for granted. No one reached for it. We're just trying to manage things, Cambria muttered. You've made it really difficult. I stood slowly. You mean I stopped being easy? No one stopped me as I walked to the door. Outside, the sky was the color of damp paper. A small wind tugged at my sleeves. I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the people inside. I had shown them the cost. They had nothing left to take. I packed in silence, one drawer at a time. No list, no note. Just the steady rhythm of folding what was mine and leaving what wasn't. The fruit basket went out first. Then the family photos. The ones where I was in the background holding the camera or the coats. I didn't announce anything. No goodbye text. No change of address card. Let them wonder. Or not. The truck arrived on Thursday morning. A rental. No company name on the side, just silver paint and space for everything I was taking. I filled it with slow hands and steady breath, my books, my files, a few quilts, a kettle, the good dishes. Nothing fragile. I didn't have anything fragile left. By the time I closed the front door, I felt neither sadness nor triumph, only certainty. I drove west first, then north toward a small town near the Idaho border. It wasn't marked on most maps. That was part of the draw. No one would come looking. And I wouldn't need to explain. The cabin sat on a stretch of land where pine trees leaned like they were listening. I'd seen the listing months ago and saved it, never intending to move. Just daydreaming the way people do when they've given themselves away and haven't yet imagined taking anything back. But now it wasn't a dream. The keys were in my pocket. The windows faced east. The porch had just enough room for a chair, a table, and one person who no longer waited for anything. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set my bags down without a sound. Then I opened the nearest window and let the cold air in. It smelled like pine and beginning. The cabin didn't need much, just a broom, a kettle, and time. I swept out dust that didn't belong to me, opened windows that hadn't moved in years, and let the quiet settle like it had been waiting just as long as I had. I started small herbs in the windowsill, a few pots of lavender along the porch. The ground was stubborn, but I had been more so. I painted again, nothing ambitious, just the way light moved through the trees, or how steam curled off my tea in the morning. I didn't show anyone. That was the best part. At the library in town, I volunteered to lead a workshop, life accounting for retirees. We met once a week. It wasn't about budgets. It was about value, about learning to name what you've carried and what you no longer owe. The calls came again. Cambria's number once, then Lily's. I let them ring. I didn't block them. I didn't need to. Some answers aren't refusals. They're releases. In the evening, I wrote in my journal. The one Walter gave me after retirement, back when I thought I'd fill it with recipes and travel plans. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, I don't need them to make it right. I already did. Then I closed the book and placed it back on the shelf between the gardening manual and the stack of novels I hadn't yet touched. Outside, the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows that didn't reach me anymore. I poured a cup of tea and let it cool in my hands, the warmth lasting longer than I expected. It was nearly spring when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road. I didn't look up right away. Some sounds you learn to let announce themselves before deciding if they matter. Then a knock. Light. Hesitant. Cambria stood at the door with her hands in her coat pockets. Her eyes were tired. Her shoulders smaller than I remembered. She didn't look like someone with a speech prepared, just someone who had driven long enough to outlast her pride. She pulled out a check and held it between us. First repayment, she said. It's not much. I didn't take it. I didn't refuse it either. I just nodded. May I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. We sat at the small table near the window, the one I used for writing and morning tea. I poured 2 cups. No sugar, no questions. She sipped quietly. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. That part of the story was over. What came next didn't need fixing, it just needed to arrive without demand. She looked around the cabin, her eyes catching on the bookshelf. The pots of lavender, the unfinished canvas resting on the easel. Then she glanced at me. Nothing in her face begged for forgiveness. Nothing in mine offered it. Not yet. But we were both sitting still. And for once there was no wait but Chapter 11, the final account. The next morning, I woke to quiet that didn't ache. Just light moving through the window, slow and certain. I made tea and opened the notebook again, not for planning or lists, but to write something that didn't need to be remembered, only said. What I gave was real. What I lost was real, but what I have now is mine. The words didn't sting. They didn't echo. They just landed gently on the page like something that had waited a long time to arrive. I looked around the cabin. The things in it weren't much, but they were mine. A chipped mug, a wool blanket, a photograph of Walter tucked behind the lamp. Nothing expensive. Nothing borrowed. Nothing still owed. A bird chirped just outside the window, brief and unbothered. I closed the notebook and set it beside the tea, the steam curling in the morning light. There was no ceremony to the peace I felt. No headline, no final word, only a sense that something old had closed gently behind me. Not slammed, not broken, just done. I picked up my cup and sat by the window as the shadows shifted on the floor. I didn't need to measure what had changed or weigh what might return. That part of the work was over, and in its place was this, the kind of quiet that asks for nothing and gives everything back. Tween us that hadn't already been set down.